Hello to you once again. The position that we have in front of us is one of my own compositions, and it requires white to give checkmate in a maximum of 6 moves. What must be pointed out is that black has offered the rook here. Now if white takes that, we have our stalemate friend back in operation. So we can't afford to touch the rook. Indeed, the premise on which black is constructing his defense here is that if he can successfully give up that rook, he has a stalemate. So we have to avoid taking it. Equally, what is wrong with that? Well, naturally, if he comes down and takes the rook, it's bishop g7 mate. But all that black needs to do is to say check. Now again, if he takes that rook, either with his king or with his rook, it matters not, it's still stalemate. But look what happens if he goes here. All that black needs to do is to keep repeating moves. Again, if he touches that rook, it's stalemate, and he can't do anything else but keep going back and forth. You see the point? Now then, so what does he do? That's the starting position. How does he home in on g7? It's a sort of a Morphy problem with a difference. How does he do it? Well, I have previously uploaded a video where I employed this technique to get to g7. Can you see it? Well done if you have. It's bishop h6. We're not taking black's rook, we're offering our bishop, but we're also offering this rook. But first of all, let's look at what happens if he takes the bishop. Do you see what's happened there? Immediately he has a pawn that's free running. It can come down the H line, so there's no question of stalemate. So all we have to do then is to play that. It's that simple. He comes here, we go here. He goes there. Game over, checkmate. So that's what happens if he takes the bishop. So clearly, taking the bishop, just to go over this again, we've played bishop h6 and we've demonstrated that taking the bishop is a no-no. What happens if he takes this rook, or indeed moves to any of these squares? Let's just whip the rook off. Can you see it? Well, yes, of course you can. We achieve our objective in 2 moves with bishop g7 mate. So he can't touch the rook now. He can't touch the bishop, and he can't afford to touch the rook. So what does he have left? Well, clearly, if he checks on the back rank, all that we need to do is to take like this. And it's checkmate next move, because all that he'd have is taking the bishop, and we just move the king out the way. And this is one of these unusual situations where you can move the king and deliver checkmate by means of an masked that becomes an unmasked attack. Checkmate. So none of that works. What about if he checks like that? How do we deal with that? Well, you deal with this in a very similar way. You go here, and of course, he only has 1 move, but it makes it a mate in 1 fewer move, and there it is, checkmate. So none of that works. So exactly what does black have in this position? Well, he doesn't have much. We've tried taking the bishop, we've tried taking the rook and moving down here, checking on e8, checking on f7. If he moves anywhere along here, let's just max it. How do we deal with this? Just take a good look at that. We can't play bishop g7 at once because he'd whip it off with his rook. And then he's free to start taking pawns, isn't he? Giving himself some leeway. So what do we do there? We don't want to play to the back rank. Why not play that? Well, for starters, his rook is controlling the 7th. We can't play king f7, but he can also play this, which causes real problems. Or does it? No, because we can play bishop g7 mate. But like I say, he controls the 7th rank, so he stops it. So what do we do instead in that position? This is after bishop h6, rook a7, or indeed any of these here. We simply play down like this. That's the point. And what does he have left? What happens if he takes the bishop? Well, if he takes the bishop, we take his rook. And again, you have a situation where he goes like this, and that is indisputably checkmate. So none of that's any good. So let's just go back to the start and just check all this out. Bishop h6, he plays to here, we play to here. We've tried taking the bishop and it doesn't work. What about if he takes the rook? How do we deal with that? Well, we take his rook. He's forced to take this bishop, and then we go here, like that. No stalemate, he has to go there, like that. You queen the pawn, and it's mate on g6 next move. So none of that works. Put this back. Starting position one more time, bishop h6, and he goes here, and we go here. What about if he checks on the back rank? How do we deal with that? Just take a look at that, instead of taking the rook, or instead of taking the bishop. Because all the while, you see, we're threatening bishop to g7 mate. So he has to either take the bishop, or take the rook, or check on the back rank. Well, all that we need to do is to play there. And we're renewing our threat of bishop g7 mate. There's only one way out for him, and that's to do that. So what do we do then? Right, well, we're back in this scenario again. We're leaving him with no choice. He has to take. And he's freeing himself up there. And so it's a simple matter there, and that is a checkmate in a maximum of 6 moves. I hope you enjoyed that one. It is very instructive, as all these problems are, and be sure to watch out for the next one, and goodbye for now.